Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of the Christian Recorder Dialogues. As you know, over the past few weeks, we have been interviewing AME Church leadership on a run-up to the General Conference. And on Mother's Day, we interviewed Bishop Vashti McKenzie. And today, as we celebrate Father's Day week, as well as commemorate the Emanuel 9, and now celebrate for the first time in federal history, Juneteenth, it gives me great pleasure to introduce today the senior bishop of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the 115th elected and consecrated bishop, the presiding prelate of the 11th Episcopal District, chairman of the Board of Trustees of Edward Waters College, and the only bishop that can properly do a drum cadence, the Right Reverend Adam Jefferson Richardson, Jr., who will be interviewed for us today by Mr. Antoine C. Wright. Welcome, Bishop. Thank you. We're excited to have you. And also the host of the General Conference, which we'll talk more about later. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you, Antoine, and welcome. And we're looking forward to today's discussion. I'll be back later on to do the announcements.
Thank you, Editor Thomas, always. And thank you, Kirtiana, for making sure Editor Thomas does everything he needs to do. In other words, does his job. It is my high honor to be with the senior bishop of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. But before we get to him, so I will not get in trouble, let me do my AME protocol. Bishop, I've learned over the years that I can't remember the exact protocol, so I count it up by saying from the top to the parking lot. We acknowledge all of our leadership in the AME Church, and certainly to my bishop, Bishop Samuel Green and Supervisor Green, the 7th Episcopal District, and of course, my uncle, the 133rd elected and consecrated bishop, Bishop Harry L. C. Wright and Supervisor C. Wright. I thank them so much. Bishop Richardson needs no introduction. Most preachers, pastors, or leaders in the Christian faith, their goal is to preach a sermon. As I get older and grow in my faith, I've learned the best sermon anyone could ever preach is the life they live. And if you have watched the life of Bishop Adam J. Richardson Jr., you know he preaches a heck of a sermon by the way he lives. And so, Bishop, it is certainly my high honor to have you today. We will not take up much of your time because I know you're busy, including getting ready for what should be a dynamic General Conference. So I'll start with this. You did not wake up one morning and become the senior bishop of the AME Church. Talk to us from a Sunday school version perspective of how your journey went from there to here.
Well, first of all, let me express appreciation for the opportunity to join you today in this conversation. And let me express appreciation also to Editor Thomas for the fine job that he is doing in this regard, and to thank you for the role that you play in the national political scene and what you mean to the African Methodist Episcopal Church.
Thank you.
So you're right. I did not wake up one morning and say that I wanted to be senior bishop, but I did start as a boy preacher. I've been at this now for 59 years, at least it will be in August. Right after the Christian Education Congress in Florida, in the 11th District, I preached my first sermon. And then in 2 years, I was admitted to the annual conference, the Old Tampa Annual Conference. And 2 years later, I was ordained a deacon while at FAMU and while playing on the snare drum line in the FAMU marching band, FAMU Marching 100 band. And then 2 years after that, I was elected an itinerant elder. Such a thing is likely not to happen in these times. We've set a higher standard for admission and for ordination. But nonetheless, that's my story. And from that place into the ITC more than 50 years ago, where I rolled up to the ITC in front of the administration building with everything that I owned on the back seat of my car. And but from that place, became not only a student, but eventually a member of that faculty. And then after some years of being in the field, of actually serving as the chairman of the board of the Interdenominational Theological Center. I was elected a bishop in 1996 after having served 18 years at the Bethel AME Church in Tallahassee. And we had I think, a wonderful ministry there. The church saw fit to elect me, and God willed it so. And I became the last person elected in that old system and the old method of electing bishops. From that, I was assigned to the 14th Episcopal District, which embraced 6 countries in West Africa, with headquarters in Ghana and in Monrovia, Liberia. And then from there, after 4 years, assigned to the 19th Episcopal District, with headquarters in Johannesburg. Wonderful place, wonderful people. And I honor God for that experience. And then subsequent to that, was assigned for 8 years in the 2nd Episcopal District, which covers, as you know, the mid-Atlantic states. That includes Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. And then for the last 9 years, which is unprecedented in this modern era, to have served the good people of the electrifying 11th Episcopal District, and subsequent to the untimely passing of the senior bishop, Bishop McKinley Young, a great friend of mine and a great man of God, went to be with the Lord. And by seniority, that role fell to me. And so here I am as the senior bishop heading into the General Conference, happens to be at my home state. And I mean, who could have imagined such a thing? But here I am. So after all of these years, nearing 60 years, I'll be going into the General Conference as a senior bishop, as a bishop, but as senior bishop and the host bishop of this 51st session of the General Conference.
Wow, that's your story. That's your song. And I know you praise your Savior all day long. What a story, Bishop. And for all of you who are tuned in.
And I need to say, Brother C. Wright, that for the past 51 years, I've been married to Connie Spates Richardson, and we have 2 wonderful adult children, and they have been so meaningful to my life, and I praise God for family.
Well, Bishop, we honor you and your entire family. We thank you for your service, what you do for the AME Church, but also what your service means to this country. Because this country, this little experiment called America, would not be what it is without the experiences of the African Methodist Episcopal Churches. So we thank you. For those of you who are watching us, please feel free to let us know where you're from, your district, your home church, who your pastor is. We would love to hear from you. And if you have any comments or questions, please put those in the chat. We will try to get to them. You know, Bishop, we're living in some interesting times. I practice yoga on a consistent basis. And what yoga has taught me is that we're sometimes forced to make adjustments. The AME Church and churches around the world have been forced to make adjustments due to COVID-19, this pandemic we're living through. The worst since 1913, that's caused some of the worst economic challenges since 1918, that has disproportionately impacted communities that look like ours. How has the AME Church, from a totality standpoint, had to adjust due to COVID-19 and what it has done to all of our communities?
Well, the first thing I would say is to acknowledge the fact that COVID-19 is a mean and indiscriminate bully. In the 25 years since my election as a bishop, I can tell you that I have not had as many deaths among preachers as I've had in these months since the World Health Organization declared this period of time as a pandemic. And I am certain that what we did as a denomination turned out to be a life-saving strategy. It is important for us to recognize that that COVID was not a hoax, as we had been led to believe even by the head of state. And of course, we made the adjustment, advising our constituents that in-person worship experiences, with very few minor exceptions, would be off limits. And I believe that it saved a lot of lives. Now we are encouraging vaccinations. We hope to have at least 70% of our community vaccinated with any of those life-saving drugs that are available that I think will help. So in our district, we identified about 75 spaces in which persons could come to be vaccinated. And of those, up to this point, we've had between 30 and 35,000 shots given out of the doors of AME churches. Wow. And we've been associated with a number of organizations, including a task force in the state of Florida to encourage the Black church to mobilize its people to get vaccinated. And we've also been involved with clergy organizations across the country to encourage vaccinations. I think this is the only way out from the pandemic. We've tried to do everything we could to encourage our people to observe all of the protocols coming down from the CDC and how vital it is for community health. We've even attached it to biblical principles, beginning with the people of Israel in the wilderness, and who were quarantined at the site of something they thought might be infectious. And Jesus himself preached a sermon from that experience as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness. And so that whole notion to me carries with it the idea of some kind of preventive medication, if you will, therapy that would prevent the spread of infectious disease. So it is biblical. It is a way to look at the combination of faith and science. And that we because the thing about COVID is it does not give a hoot about your prayer life. It does not care that you have a prayer life. Prayer sustains us. It calms us. It might bless us, and we found through prayer we can be healed. Mm-hmm. But COVID does not care about whether you attend services on Sunday morning or whether you pray at night or pray in the morning. COVID is a bully, and we have to do everything we can, including exercising sense in mitigating the spread of COVID-19. So the church has made the adjustments in the style of worship, in the ways in which we communicate with our members. We have looked at new opportunities beyond the AME ministry and even out of the country. We find people who are coming into our worship experiences from other places other than the cities where our churches are located. So this has been a phenomenal time for us, and I call it a time of improvisation. And that improvisation has allowed us to remain open, and some of our churches have even been more viable than they were when they were doing in-person ministry and worship.
You know, Bishop, speaking of in-person and speaking of worship, yesterday, 6 years ago, a 21-year-old white supremacist who had been radicalized by the name of Dylan Roof walked into historic Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina, while people were worshiping by way of Bible study. They embraced him, they loved him, they hugged him. He then turned to his .40 caliber pistol and killed 9 people in their church. There were 3 survivors. Yesterday marked 6 years. Give us your thoughts as we look back 6 years and the impact that has had on the ministry as a whole and the country and the world as a whole, from your perspective.
It's so unfortunate that we still have to wrestle with violence in our world, in our spaces, in our communities, and that white supremacy is still a thing in America. And it is good that we don't call the assailant's name very often. But the fact is, he would have been alleged to be a Christian. Grew up in the Lutheran Church, and yet his sense of race was more important than his sense of the Christ.
Mm.
And for him to walk into a church, into sacred space, in prayer meeting, where they had just, I understand, concluded the quarterly conference,
Mm-hmm.
which means that his attack would have involved even more people. But this handful of people decided they would stick around for Bible study and for prayer, and allowed him to participate in that. That's so incredible. I still find that just unbelievable. But the actions of the survivors and the families,
Mm-hmm.
I think, spared Charleston. And we had just in our Episcopal district had a lay convention on the night before, and involved in that was the brother Walter Scott, who came to talk about the passing of his brother and the death of his brother, the killing, the murder of his brother. But as it turns out, that night after we gave the lay benediction, we learned of the massacre that took place. And what I think is so disturbing for us is that we knew these people. We were friends. We saw one another at the church meetings. So these were not abstract situations. We knew them. And but their deaths and the grace that those family members showed, not everybody, because I tell you the truth, even now I have difficulty with the notion of what does forgiveness do.
Mm.
And I have to confess that I struggle as a Christian. And I think I've landed on the notion that forgiveness does not absolve the person of consequences, but it does unload us from carrying that burden and lugging around 9 caskets for 6 years. That's too much of a burden. But it did what not even an economic boycott of South Carolina could do. And that was to take down the Confederate battle flag on the state grounds. And the governor of South Carolina instigated that. Bishop John Hurst Adams, during his season of leadership in South Carolina, called for a boycott of South Carolina. But not even then, not even the NCAA and championship experiences could keep racists from acknowledging that flag was their flag. But the deaths of these 9 persons and the survivors saw this one act, symbolic though it may be, but I think it was meaningful. And so now, as AMEs, we still remember these deaths. It's memorialized in the Book of Discipline, and every year, this time of year, we commemorate their deaths.
You know, Bishop, it's been 6 years. We still do not have federal or federal legislation in place that would have prevented Dylann Roof from getting a gun. We know that loop in the law is known as the Charleston loophole. In South Carolina, we still do not have a hate crime bill that Dylann Roof could have been perhaps charged with for the acts he committed. There are some who argue that the church has no role or should not play a role in politics. The church should be its own animal, just doing its thing. When you think about Emanuel, you think about all the things going on in our country. You, as the senior bishop of the AME Church, you say what to those who say the church has no place or has no say in political discussions or political engagement?
They have not read their Bible.
Mm.
As a matter of fact, you don't have to leaf through many pages in the Bible before you come to the book of Exodus that addresses the issue of the prophet speaking on behalf of God to the head of state, a real government, to say, let my people go.
Mm.
And now the letting them go was not just a furlough, but real liberation. I contend, and this is just A.J. Richardson talking, I contend that the Bible does not open with the question, are you saved? But rather, are you free?
Hmm.
So the gospel that I am acquainted with and that I feel obliged by the call of God to preach to the people is a two-fisted gospel. You'll hear me say that a lot. And it is salvation and liberation. And for the rest of the scriptures, from Exodus forward, more than 3,000 verses of scripture that address the issue of justice. So to say that the church has no role to play in politics, if politics has anything to do with public policy, name a prophet who was not in direct communication with the head of state. And so for me, it is important for clergy persons, if you're looking just to preach sermons and help people feel good on Sunday mornings, you're in the wrong business. Because at some point, your people are affected and your voice has to be made, has to be heard. You have to encourage the people to be engaged in the process of voting and selecting their leaders, and selecting leaders on the basis of what those leaders say they believe and the policies that they want to encourage the government to have for the benefit of the whole. So it is important, I believe, for the church. I've never been in a situation, even when I served on the continent of Africa, to sit with heads of state, to be with other clergy people, and to share with them what our insights were, and to sit with. When I first got elected, it was an amazing thing. The governor of Florida called me. I didn't even know that he knew me. But the fact is that I had him to the church, and we had him to speak for Martin Luther King Day. But when they heard I was elected a bishop, they invited me to the governor's mansion. And we sat there for lunch around the kitchen table. And he was a kind of country guy, Governor Lawton Childs. But he raised questions with me about my assignment. He knew more about Liberia than the newly assigned bishop.
Wow.
So to say that there has to be this disconnect is just impossible. Because there's too much scripture that undergirds the notion of preachers being engaged in policy making. For example, right now, there's this thing going on about critical race theory. And most of the people who are opposed to having this taught in our schools have not thought much about, I don't think, really what critical race theory has to do with. And it really has to do with the 402 years of our history on these shores, which has been bathed and baptized and baked into the system. It is structural. It is unfortunate that they don't get it, and they really want to gloss over and whitewash the whole notion of these years of history. And in order for us to fix it, we're going to have to face it. And the new generation of people coming along, young people, 6th, 7th graders learning civics must also learn what their country is about. And I don't think it'll be a turnoff. I think it will be an opportunity for growth and development and a real appreciation for this. I wouldn't give up my passport for anything. And I can also say that I believe that Black people in America perhaps love this country as much or more than any other group. I didn't know I loved America so until I was in the 19th district on the day of 9/11. And we were doing tributes and memorials and the like. And I was on tap to preach and to give responses and so forth. And then a South African choir sang the national anthem. And I cried like a baby. We have this ambivalent notion about America. It's a love-hate relationship. But until we face the truth about what this country means and what it has meant to our people, and you can't ignore what happened in 1919 when all the massacres that took place. Can't ignore every time Black people excel, every time we begin to look at economic growth and economic possibilities, there's a group of people who decide that's too much for you. So Black Wall Street destroyed. An elected government in Wilmington, North Carolina, people elected to office massacred. Here in Florida, Rosewood, right outside of Gainesville. Every time there is uplift, there is pushback. And so now I'm seeing this pendulum swing again. And it really comes because I think of the election of 45, who emboldened a group of people to say that we want our country back.
You know, Bishop, speaking of elections and speaking of leadership and so forth, every leader has some type of goal when they're elected or pushed or asked to serve in a leadership role. When I think about you as a senior bishop, give me one for the Father, one for the Son, one for the Holy Spirit, your top 3 goals for you as the senior bishop of the AME Church.
Well, I can tell you there are several, and I kind of anticipated that you would ask me that. One, I guess, is beginning with myself, some personal goals. One is to try to maintain my health, to be engaged in continuous learning, to read more, and to prepare for retirement, and in that to complete my bucket list, which includes reading books and writing books. I think I have at least 2 books inside of me and places that I want to see. We're close to Father's Day, and so I think about my own father and what my father did for me as a lesson. Only my father stands between me and the condition of slavery. His father, my father's father, was born in Boston, Georgia in 1854, only 7 years before the first shot was fired at Fort Sumter, South Carolina. So among the things that I think that we have to do is and this is an institutional goal, is to make sure that our people understand fully what the AME Church is all about. And so I want to do a few things. One is I want to reintroduce Bible reading because I think we are a people of the book, and I think we have to rely upon that book to give us guidance. And then I want to reintroduce the hymnal. I know we're going to get pushback on that, but I think the hymnal represents a repository of our theological reflections, and we don't get that in contemporary music as much. So I think there's a lot in that book that we need to read and to sing that reinforces our relationship with Christ. Every Sunday morning, I attend the connectional church school that we also call Bible Discovery Hour. And Dr. Beelan sings a hymn every Sunday, and he asks the question, have you ever sung this hymn before? So I think hymn singing is an important part of what we do. I think we have to also, one of my goals is to see mental health ministry become a meaningful part of what it is that we offer as an AME Church. Counseling is important. And I wish that even now that we would find a way to do teaching, require of our ministers continuing education that includes methods of counseling and dealing with people and being sensitive to the needs of people, not just preaching at people, as important as that is, but also engaging with people. I think it's also important for us to reach out to young people and young adults in particular, to engage them, to ask them questions, to give them a place at the table so that they can have a say in what it is that we do. And then I guess finally that we would encourage vaccinations to mitigate the spread of infectious disease. That's important in a contemporary kind of way, but the others of these are goals that I think we can pursue.
Bishop, staying in that lane on the highway for a second, what advice, as we return to a sense of new normalcy with COVID and so forth, there's some people who are going to wake up and worship in their bed wardrobe, so they will not return to a traditional worship service now that they know they can worship from their home. What advice would you give to pastors and leaders who have to make adjustments now to what the new norm will be, and as we attempt to transition out of COVID, but also as people transition to the way they worship?
I think improvisation is going to have to be the watchword. We're not going to be able to go back to pre-pandemic reality. That's not going to happen. And I think we have to give people options. And so a part of what we do will be in person, just like we're going to do at the General Conference. Part of what we do will be virtual. And others of us will gather, but we won't be in the same way in which we were in 2016 or any other year of General Conference. You won't have 12,000 people under one roof. And so with that, I think we're going to have to make options available and to improvise. We won't be able, for example, to hold people as long as we have. Church won't be as long, I don't think, as we have known in previous years. But I think we'll figure out what is needed, what is necessary to consider ourselves having fully worshiped God, and at the same time give people options. Because the other thing is that people is they multitask even while they're engaged in a virtual worship experience. They're, clicking on something, they're answering emails, they're doing all that. So they're not as fully engaged as they were. So we have to figure out a way to reduce the amount of time. Some people are no more than 30 minutes in worship now. And we've also going to have to review what we really mean by the priesthood of all believers, even as we do things like baptize and ordain and serve the Holy Communion. Who is eligible to do that in this new paradigm? So we're going to have a lot to figure out. And I think between now and the next General Conference, when we work on the Book of Discipline, and which is another one of my goals, that we would work our way through it to make it more user-friendly and to make it accessible and to put things that relate to one another on the same page and near the same page, which makes it user-friendly. But also to look at the critical things around ordination, for example. Who can be ordained and where can they serve? So all of those questions have to be. I would add one more thing to this, and I've been kind of pushing this for a few years. It took a while for it to get out of just conversation into consideration by the revisions committee, which has to do with evaluating pastors. And I think that the evaluation is necessary. Nobody goes through any other profession without some kind of evaluation about the affected people. Sometimes it's a board, and sometimes it's the people who make a decision about who is serving. And if there is transparency, we cannot, which is the reason why we also have to require continuing education. In our district, I have insisted on having things like School of the Shepherds as a kind of continuing education, to have some required reading. Person goes to seminary, graduate, and never pick up another book. That's not only idiotic, it's unconscionable. And so I think we're just going to have our trained ministry will have transparency, ministerial evaluations. I think will only make us not only better preachers, but better Christians that will make a better church.
You know, speaking of better, I've always heard that the blacker the college, the sweeter the knowledge. I've heard that HBCUs are the things that make this country better as they make people who come out of them better. You serve as the chair of the board of Edward Waters College, and you are an alum of FAMU. Give us the Sunday school version of why HBCUs are so critical in meeting the moment we're in this country.
Because there are still people who are entering college who may be the first persons in their families to graduate from high school and the first persons to ever go into college. There is something about being in an environment in which you are appreciated and your presence means something. And I think that the whole idea of the HBCU is still an idea whose time has come. We are not in a place of going extinct. As a matter of fact, I think that institutions like Edward Waters, we see what it is doing to improve the lives of young people and the faculty people who care about them. FAMU has had as its slogan for years now, that we expect excellence and excellence with caring. So the idea that we still want to push people is not beyond their breaking point, but to push them with that person knowing that they are being cared about. And so I think that HBCUs are important. The AME Church, for example, has had as many as 22 schools. And when you add seminaries and all the like, closer to 40 institutions that we've had. And now we're down to a precious few, 6, I believe. But when you think about the contribution that these schools are making, I'm proud to say that the AME Church insists that education is vital. When you think about it also, and the whole notion of celebration of Juneteenth, for example, Edward Waters was founded 155 years ago. That the one thing that they wanted coming out of slavery in Florida, and of course in Texas, they got the news on June 19th, 1865. But we got the news in Florida on May the 20th. And so we've been celebrating. I honor, those responsible for making Juneteenth a national holiday. But for us in Florida, that date was May the 20th. But among the things that made the AME Church relevant, I believe, in those early days and made growth possible was its emphasis on education, liberation, and salvation, and not necessarily in that order.
That's strong. Bishop, we're coming around the mountain, so here we come as we kind of come to an end. Now, as AMEs, when we say we're coming to an end, that usually means there's another closer coming, but we are coming to an end. I'll ask you this. Yesterday, something historic happened. The first Black woman to serve as Vice President of these United States took to the podium as legislation was signed for the first time in 40 years to declare another federal holiday. This time it was named Juneteenth. We celebrate it today from a holiday perspective, federal holiday, but tomorrow's the actual day. Sunday is Father's Day. When you think about Juneteenth, Father's Day, when you think about the AME Church, put a bow on those three things together from your perspective with your wisdom.
All of those things are important for our understanding about our self-worth, our raison d'etre as a church, and for who we are as a people. As I just mentioned, our date in Florida, we've celebrated emancipation for years. My dad took me to the first Emancipation Proclamation worship experience, celebration, when I was just a boy. And we celebrated that on January the 1st. It's still being observed in that way. But I think this is important. But I would, as much as I appreciate having the national holiday observing the end of slavery, I would much have preferred that the legislature pass some important legislation, which would have had to do with H.R. 1, H.R. 4, and the John Lewis Act and others. Those to me would mean more than just having that Juneteenth celebration, as important as it is. And I don't mean to disparage. I don't mean to suggest that it ought not have been. But if I had my druthers, I would much have preferred that they address those issues, which I think would be more relevant to our experience today. Again, I mentioned what this means in terms of my father, who only he stands between me and slavery, which means it just hadn't been that long ago. And I think that we are on our way. There's a pendulum at work, and the pendulum swings, and the pendulum swings based on public policy and where people are in their way of analyzing their own reality. And so at this point, I think we are having to fight back like never before.
There you go.
And we have to make our people understand how important it is for them to be engaged in the process. We cannot go to sleep. We have to keep pushing forward. And when I think about the people that I'm associated with, even now, you talk about the issue of politics and all of that, but I'm involved with people who are engaged. I meet with. I would have been today on a call with some liberal theologians, moderates, and progressives who meet with politicians, meet with people who are working in the White House on public policy. The Faith Table, Jim Wallace and Barbara Williams Skinner and Otis Moss Jr., Otis Moss III, Al Sharpton, and W. Franklin Richardson, the Conference of National Black Churches. And all of these agencies are involved in this. And so I think we have to stay vigilant, and I think we have to keep pressing forward. So we are preaching what I think is important to preach, and that is salvation and liberation that give glory to God in Christ.
Now, don't get mad if I steal that from you. I give you credit one time, but after that, I won't. my last question for you. When the ink dries on the pages of history about the tenure of the senior bishop, Bishop Adam J. Richardson, Jr., what do you hope people remember you by?
That I gave it my best, that I was sincere, and that I tried to preach thoughtful sermons, and that the ministry was important to me to bless lives and to help our people as a whole. It's not to suggest that I don't have passion for all people, but I am passionate about the progress of African and African American people and those of us who are in diaspora. This is who I am and who I hope people will remember me to be by. And on Father's Day, you're calling me senior bishop. When I served in South Africa, the people would refer to me as his lordship, and the language they borrowed from the British. Next week or so, they'll be calling me Mr. Chairman. But my greatest thought was self-affirmation. I'm honored to be Monique and Trey's father.
That's all right with me. Happy Father's Day, Bishop.
Thank you.
And I thank you for your time. I thank you for what you're doing. I thank you for what you're doing for ministry and for our people. John Thomas III, Mr. Editor. Come on.
Yes, thank you, Senior Bishop and Brother C. Right. Before you both go, we do our announcements. In the British House of Commons, the oldest elected member of the House of Parliament is called the Father of the House. And Bishop Richardson, today you truly have shown us why you are the AME Church's father. And I was seeing in some of the chats, some of the comments that, this wisdom, we take for granted in all the hustle and bustle of this virtual world. You said some things today that we needed to hear and we need to hear. And publisher Beelan wanted me to also explicitly thank you for being on Connectional Church School. You have not missed a Sunday. And in fact, y'all win the banner most Sundays, but I'm not going to say we're not going to touch that one. But thank you for showing us, reminding us what it means to truly be deep and understanding the world. Because, and I hope that over these next few years, as you go into the twilight of your tenure, that you'll be able to share and to do these things in helping us. So thank you, Senior Bishop, for sharing us with your wisdom and being a father to us all in the church. And Brother C, right before we move on, you did a very important work yesterday with CBS News. And could you share a little bit about with us what's going on this weekend with the commemoration of the Emanuel 9?
Sure. Yesterday it aired throughout the day on CBS, on Viacom, various networks, but I had a chance to interview Pastor Manning, who's now the pastor at Mother Emanuel Church, and we went really deep and wide on 6 years ago to now to what to look ahead toward. Very emotional interview that aired yesterday. There will be a longer version that will air on CBS Sunday in 30-minute chunks, and then I sat down for the first time ever. The first time the three of them had sat down together for an interview with Eliana, Milana, and Miss Jennifer Pinckney. The interview was very emotional. We had to stop a few times for me because I had a chance to work with Senator Pinckney in the state legislature in South Carolina, and he was my elder at one point in time in the Wateree district down in South Carolina, where my home church, Prodigal AME Church, is. And so we're personal friends. He was extremely close to my uncle, very respected in our family. And so it was an emotional day, but I was so happy to see that Eliana graduated from Drury High School in Columbia. She'll be going to Temple University in the fall to study theater and dance. And Milana is finding her place. And Miss Jennifer continues to be an inspiration for the world. And that interview was so emotional. I hope that everyone gets a chance to see it. And not just because I'm in it, but I think it's so important to hear their testimony and to see what they've had to live through. Because at some point in time, others will have some sort of experience where they will lose someone they love, Bishop.
We did email out 2 of those clips yesterday to the Connectional Church, and we will share as we can the information for the interview. But thank you, Antoine, for doing that and for taking our story to wherever. And before we really go to these announcements, we're coming to Florida, and we have an announcement at the end. But Bishop, I couldn't let you go without at least giving a small pitch for the General Conference before we move into our announcement, since you are also our gracious host. Bishop.
Welcome to Florida. We're trying to get ready for you. And it will not be what we had envisioned 5 years ago, but it will take place. And we've done everything that we think is good to do. We followed the CDC guidelines. I want to thank convention planner and Miss Rankin, along with her team, and Mr. Richard Lewis, for what they've been able to accomplish, and the fact that we are doing this improvisational dance, as it were, to make sure that we get our business handled. So we could not have a general conference without districts 14 through 20, and that is being accomplished. And we're also making it safe for everyone who attends. So come on to Florida, those of you who can come, and to be a part of this new thing that's happening in our church. So thank you very much, and God bless you. We anticipate your presence.
Bishop,
right,
since we're going to be in Florida, Bishop, I hope I get a good meal on you.
You got it.
Thank y'all both, and we will definitely be hearing more from y'all later. Thank you, Bishop. Thank you, Antoine. Now to our announcements. So, ladies and gentlemen, as always, we encourage you to continue supporting the Christian Recorder. We are publishing $36 a year, and we ask you to part of your subscription helps us to do these very important and wonderful broadcasts. And, you know, it's the world's oldest newspaper published by Black people, and it's been around since 1852. We've survived pandemics, we've survived Donald Trump, and we hope to survive this pandemic too. So please continue to support us with your work, with your offerings. Also, we could ask you to support the AME Publishing House. This week, we emailed out the Emanuel 9 resources for Mother Emanuel Remembrance Sunday. Of course, we recognize the Emanuel 9 as well as the survivors of that tragedy. And we have worship resources for you on the website at iamame.org. We emailed them out yesterday, but in case you didn't see them, you can go visit iamame.org to look at the resources and to help. And remember, even if you just say the names, we must always remember to say the names and remember those of Mother Emanuel. Also, we would like to remind you that our next dialogue will be June 24th at 7 p.m. It will be a very special dialogue. We have been going through recognizing and remembering and honoring the legacy of our retiring servants at the general officer and Episcopal level. And on Thursday, June 24th at 7 p.m., we will have a dialogue remembering the legacy of McKinley Young. Of course, as we know, Bishop Young was the 102nd elected and consecrated bishop of the AME Church. He died in 2019, and he would have retired this year, 2020. So we are hosting that dialogue in his honor, and we will be having a conversation with the family. So it will be the McKinley Young family along with the video tribute. So we encourage you to please be here for that very important, very special time where we remember the legacy of McKinley Young. Once again, Thursday, June 7th at 7 p.m. Eastern. We also want to recognize our sponsor for today for this broadcast. Our sponsor for today is the Reverend Dr. Sylvester Scott Beeman, candidate for bishop. Reverend Dr. Beeman is the pastor of Bethel AME Church in Wilmington, Delaware. His candidate number is number 401. Once again, that is Sylvester Beeman for bishop. Thank you, Dr. Beeman, for your support, for allowing us to make this broadcast possible. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's all the time we have for today. We're going to close now with our video for General Conference. Bishop Richardson invited you once again, and we have this video to remind you what you need to know before you go and how you can stay safe. Thank you, and we'll see you again on Thursday.
Get ready to meet safely at the African Methodist Episcopal Church 51st Quadrennial Session of the General Conference. It's taking place July 6th through the 10th in the Orange County Convention Center in Orlando, Florida, and in the Cape Town International Convention Center in Cape Town, South Africa. Also of note, the Orange County Convention Center is one of the first convention centers in the nation to receive the Global Biorisk Advisory Council Star. It's recognized as the gold standard of safe venues. They provide a special air filtering process to ensure clean air throughout the day. The health and safety of our members is top priority, and with that goal in mind, we've created a safe space following CDC meeting protocols, as well as Department of Health and local government guidance in both Orlando and in Cape Town. Following meeting guidelines, attendees will be screened daily, masks will be required, and we will have a medical team on site should any health or COVID-related issues arise. Plus, we're reducing the size of groups gathered at any one time in any one place to allow for physical distancing, and you will see hand sanitizer stations and safety reminders throughout. And when it comes to food and beverage, you can expect some grab-and-go options that are individually pre-packed, and restaurants will be open and operating in a safe manner. Our traditions and practices you've come to expect will still be the same, just delivered in a different way. We have planned our meeting spaces so delegations can meet in smaller rooms and locations. Each of these areas will be digitally connected to view the General Conference proceedings. Within each delegation meeting room, delegates will be able to utilize a speaker queue to be allowed to address the General Conference and vote in real time. There will also be separate areas for the General Session and VIPs, chaplains, and paid observers. Our mobile app will be the best source for all up-to-date information while on site. As you can see, safety protocols and plans are in place to help ensure a safe and healthy meeting environment, but it will take all of us working together, following the protocols so that we will be able to meet safely for a successful General Conference. You can find more information about the 51st Quadrennial Session of the General Conference by going to www.ame-church.com.
All